Well, this is the world's moment of truth. All of our lives will change at the COP26 Climate Summit. Decisions made here will impact our jobs, how we heat our homes, what we eat, and even how we travel. And in the words of UK PM Boris Johnson, the question everyone is asking is whether we'll seize this moment or let it slip away. Welcome to a special edition of Ticker Climate, your home of COP26. I'm Brittany Coles, and my co-host Scott Hamilton, who is my climate change and energy expert, joins me live. Hi Scott, an exciting day. What's on the agenda?
Look, this is a very big day and it's actually a really important day because we've got just hours ago the opening of COP26, which is the biggest climate summit since Paris in 2015. Critically important, and I think, as Prince Charles said, it's the last chance saloon, so we're going to really need to get into this.
Exactly right, Scott. I mean, there's so much happening on the agenda. Let's bring in our guest for today, climate activist Daniel Bleakley. Daniel, thanks for your time today.
Great, thanks very much for having me, Brittany.
Now we have you both here. Let's begin with Alok Sharma. Now, he's the president of COP26, and he has called on global leaders to banish ghosts of the past. Scott, what do you think this means?
Yeah, look, I think it really means that we need to be focused on action. There's been a lot of talk, and people are talking for many years about the need to take action, but largely we have not seen it. And even with the commitments that people have made, up until this time, we're going to be looking at well over 2 degrees warming, and that is catastrophic. If you just think about the Black Summer and those horrendous bushfires in Australia, and then followed by California, and we're currently just over 1 degrees warming. Imagine what 2 degrees warming or more is going to be like. So we really need to make sure we put those ghosts to the past and talk about the future. Put the past in the past is what we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you've just mentioned there, Scott, as well, 1.5 degrees is, of course, the target here. Now, Daniel, do you think that it's a little bit too late? Is this the time when global leaders are coming together? They're finally all together on the one stage. What can we expect to see from them?
Well, it is late, and we should have acted a long time ago, but we can only do what we can now. And if we do act urgently now, if the world comes together and decides to take serious action on the climate crisis, we will be able to limit the damage that is being done dramatically. But it really depends on strong leadership around the world. And we have seen in the last few months and the last 12 months that the rest of the world is really starting to get serious on taking action on climate. And countries around the world, their pledges are in stark contrast to the Australian government's approach. The Australian government has announced that they will go for a net zero by 2050 target. However, that plan has been exposed as fraudulent, and we've seen multiple reports coming out that the data that's been used, there's been a gross manipulation of data in this so-called plan. So we're going to see massive pressure on Australia over the next couple of weeks in Glasgow. And hopefully that pressure does result in serious change to Australia's climate policy.
Yeah, and just before all of our leaders did get to Glasgow over the weekend, they did have a G20 summit over in Rome. So we saw countries like the US and the UK who have pushed Australia to step up its ambition in the present decade. So Scott, what do you think about Scott Morrison's targets? He's defended them. He says that Australia is undergoing a transition period. What do you think of this?
Yeah, look, I think that committing to net zero by 2050 is the bare minimum. But it's actually not even that good, because that plan that he put out last week has got no detail. And world leaders are even now coming out and saying that it's got no detail, and it's basically not worth the PowerPoint that it's been written on. So that is a real problem, and in fact that takes us backwards, because it's giving false hope and false indications, and we've talked about this before on Ticker Climate, for the communities that currently have major power stations, major energy intensive industries. And if there's no plan, there's just no there's no way forward for them, and that's a real problem.
Yeah, exactly right, Scott. And now, Dan, I really want to know your opinion on this as well. Now, Scott Morrison, he has mentioned that Australia's come to the table back in 2005. You know, Russia and China are not here in Glasgow, but Australia is. But we are getting a bit of criticism from international leaders. So where exactly does Australia sit in terms of its emission? Where are we on the world table?
So basically, Scott Morrison has been saying that we have reduced our emissions by 20% since 2005. But this is actually a fraudulent figure. And this morning, we've seen that the French President, Emmanuel Macron, has come out and stated that Scott Morrison actually lied to him about the submarine deal. Well, Scott Morrison's actually lying to the world about Australia's emissions reduction figures. And the figure that the government continues to use, the 20% reduction since 2005 figure, is actually based on avoided deforestation rather than actual emissions cuts. So the Australian government is manipulating the data on our emissions reduction. And although Scott Morrison may have the support of some of the media here in Australia who aren't reporting on this, the international media and world leaders are seeing through these fraudulent claims.
I mean, we did see the Oz Institute. They had a massive poster in the Scottish newspaper over the weekend, which got a lot of eyes seen on it, and just shows Australia's targets are being noticed by those overseas. And speaking of that, the chair of the elders at COP26, Mary Robinson, she's come out and publicly criticised Australia's response to climate change. Let's have a listen to what she said.
Well, first of all, I do welcome the fact that at last Australia has joined other countries in agreeing to the net zero. And I'm not impressed by how Prime Minister Morrison says that Australia will get there. And frankly, Australia needs to double its target, its emissions cutting by 2030. I'm pleased that he's coming to Glasgow because I think he needs to feel the heat. He needs to feel that sense that Australia is an outlier. At least Australia is now committed to the net zero commitment, but it's not credible. That's the point.
So Scott, what do you think of that?
Well, look, this is actually really remarkable because it's actually very unusual for world leaders to actually name other world leaders and criticise them. And means that what Mary Robinson, who's one of the most respected leaders in the world, is naming Scott Morrison and saying he's a laggard and saying that he's not doing enough, but she's going further and saying that his plan is meaningless and that she doesn't believe it. And also that Australia needs to halve its emissions by 2030. And that's the big message here. It's not about 2050, it's about 2030. The whole purpose of this COP is to ratchet up the commitments of Paris in 2015, and that means 2030. And that means big cuts, but also actions. And at the moment, we've got neither out of the Australian government. And he is going to feel a lot of heat, as Mary Robinson said. And I hope that he's going to change his action, but I sadly don't think that he's going to, because he's hamstrung by the few people in the National Party that are really holding him to ransom and not letting him do anything.
Yeah, and that comes to the coal debate that, of course, is always ongoing in Australia. Now, coal and resource is one of the most highly regarded industries. It is, I guess, holding us back from reaching those targets. Now, Daniel, what do you think about the coal industry in Australia? And perhaps is this the reason why Scott Morrison has perhaps been more hesitant in terms of really achieving these targets?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that there are multiple people in the Australian government with close ties to the coal industry, and we know that the government has the capacity to support all coal workers, all fossil fuel workers, transition to clean technology, but they're choosing not to because they're trying to protect the profits of the billionaires in the coal industry. So we know now that delay is denial, and every day of delay is putting more CO2 into the atmosphere, but it's also putting more profits into the pockets of the coal industry. And that's really what's behind the Morrison government's stance on refusing to take strong action on climate. So we have the technology. The government has the capacity to support all fossil fuel workers, but they're choosing not to protect the profits of the coal industry billionaires.
Now, I love that message that you've said, and perhaps is the key message from the whole conference is delay is denial. Now, Scott Morrison is at the conference. Now, there was a bit of scrutiny, perhaps he wasn't going to attend. China's not here, Russia's not here. So is there marks that he's even there and perhaps going to have, commitments that will come to the table?
Well, look, I actually think that he was embarrassed was the reason that he's gone. That we had Prince Charles, as I say, was surprised that he wasn't going, which again is unusual for royalty to get involved in these debates. And even the Queen saying that she was irritated about all this talk and not enough action. So I actually think that he was forced into going. But really, it's not whether these leaders go that's the important thing, it's what their actions are. And now we do know that there's other world leaders that are not going, and that's not good, and there's other leaders that need to be doing more. But just because someone else is, as I've said before, pissing in the pool doesn't mean that you can piss in the pool too.
Exactly.
You need to make sure you're doing your bit.
Yeah, 100% right there. Now, Daniel Bleakley and Scott, thank you so much for your time today. Of course, all ongoing conversations and Ticker News, your home of COP26.